Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our hosts an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
Okay, well, we are really lucky today to be joined by Drago Dzieran. Drago, thank you very much for joining us today. We very much appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Drago. He's got an incredibly interesting background, which we're going to talk about here. But here's just a little brief synopsis on the background on Drago. Is that he was born in Poland while under the communist rule, and after spending a time in a communist political prison for his activism against socialist oppression, he actually immigrated to the United States in 1984. He then became a U.S. citizen and actually enlisted in the Navy in 1991, and ultimately went on to become a U.S. Navy SEAL. And for those that understand the process surrounding becoming a U.S. Navy SEAL, it's probably one of the most difficult things to do that there is. Becoming a U.S. Navy SEAL is incredibly difficult. He performed over 100 combat direct action missions as a lead breacher while deployed in Iraq. And he is most recently the author of a terrific book called My Pledge to America, One Man's Journey from Political Prisoner to U.S. Navy SEAL. Read the book. I would highly recommend you take a read of the book. Drago, as I'd mentioned a little earlier, there's lots of books about experiences as U.S. Navy SEALs. I don't think that's necessarily a unique story, although it's certainly very interesting. What makes the book so interesting is the contrast between growing up in Poland, in the communist regime, and life in the United States. And again, for anybody like myself, who kind of has grown up within North America, or more specifically Canada, we can't even fathom the issues that you had dealt with as a youngster within Poland. And it certainly makes everybody, or should make everybody, appreciate, especially those that have grown up in North America, appreciate the lifestyle we have. Because if you read Drago's book, and we're going to talk about it, Drago's life as a youngster, and even as a young adult, was exceptionally difficult. And ironically, we talked a little bit as well about becoming a Navy SEAL. Drago, I'm not quite sure what was more difficult, life as a youngster or a young adult in Poland, or becoming a U.S. Navy SEAL. Those two are probably running 1A, 1B in terms of difficulty. But again, thank you very much for joining us. We very much appreciate you taking the time.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you. Thank God.
So give us some perspective, Drago. If you go back, growing up as a youngster in Poland, give us some perspective. Again, for most of the people listening, they would have no idea, unless they read your book, about life in Poland during those early days when you were a youngster. Give us some perspective on what it was like growing up in Poland during that time.
So before I start, let me make some disclaimer here, small disclaimer. None of the countries behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe were ever communist countries. We refer to them as a communist countries. I refer to them as a communist country because this is generally accepted. They were technically socialist terror states run by socialists, communists, and Marxists like my father. So that's it's important distinctions, because people here tend to dismiss the danger of this ideology and economic system. I'm talking about socialism. Everybody know that communism is bad. People don't question that. But now I see the shift where poorly educated people kind of try to whitewash the socialism, not understanding the system. So no, socialism is not good. And all the countries, including Soviet Union, all the countries in Eastern Europe were not communist country technically. They were socialist states including Soviet Union. So that's very important. Uh, we can talk about a little bit about difference between socialism and communism, but I would like to also mention that the difficult childhood is not only mine. In Poland, there was nothing unusual. But I would like to mention also my fellow SEAL teammates who came back from also not very rich neighborhoods, sometimes from very poverty, living in the mountains, in villages. Those are very hard people, and I have utmost respect to them. And I don't consider myself being living a more difficult life than some of my teammates, fellow SEALs, lived in their childhood and their struggle. So, but that is not why I wrote this book. I didn't want to. That was not my reason. Was not to complain how socialism is bad. I want to see how great America is. I would like people to see through the prism and lens of socialist terror state how great America is. And that's my intention for the book, so we can all appreciate what we have. Of course, there is no ever perfect country. You start nitpicking everything, and I'm sure you can find things here in our America that we could improve. But again, this really minor things compared to the terror, oppression, and political murders and assassinations in socialist states, not communist, socialist states. Socialism, very dangerous ideology. People need to understand it.
Yeah, and if you go back in time, World War II effectively split Europe in half between, call it like you say, the socialist states and the non-socialist states, Eastern Western Europe. So give us some perspective, Drago, about growing up in Poland. What was it like as a youngster, during that socialist regime?
So actually, that's pretty interesting because I can give you the perspective from both sides. My father was high-ranking Communist Party member and official in Polish government. So as long as he stayed with us until I was 7 years old, we had everything. People who subscribe to socialism go along with this ideology and are morally okay with oppressing other people. They didn't have, their life was not bad, just like when my father was still with us. When he left, when I was 7 years old, this is where I seen immediate stark contrast. And then I realized that most Poles live in that poverty that I just entered. I did not have contact with my father after he left until before his death in 2019. I think 2019. So I went there with my wife, and we knew he was dying. So I was asked to come and visit him. I did, but I remember from that visit that he did not change a thing in his beliefs, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. He was the hardened communist. He always was. And the only regret he has that the socialist government allow Polish nation to stand up of their knees and kicked out the socialists and communists out of the government in the peaceful way. He was really upset about it because he believed that socialism and communism are such a great ideologies that people who are resisting it need to be eliminated, and even killed if needs to be, because the benefits of socialism and communism are more important than the life of some individuals. So this is the way he was taught, this is the way he understood and believed, and this is the way he died. So living in communist country, so from having almost everything, because living with my father, while he was in Communist Party. We had everything. They had the special stores that normal Poles could not access, which were equipped very well. They have a dining facilities that as I remember, as a 6-year-old kid, sometimes we walked to the dining facility with big special design dishes. So they load us up, and then I was bringing it home or coming with my mom and eating either there in this Communist Party headquarters or just bringing the food home and having for another day. This is something that was unavailable to general populations. The same story with clothing. We could buy any clothes basically we wanted until I was 7 years old. My father, as a communist, was allowed to have a car. So it was normally in Poland, people had to make the payment on the car, paid off the car, and then wait maybe 3-4 years to receive the car. So sometimes the wait was 7, 8, even 10 years or 10 years long. Once you made the first payment, then you finally paid off, and then the clock started ticking. And then eventually you receive the car. So my father was privileged. He didn't have to do it. He just received the car and kept paying on it. So that was my life until I was 7 years old. We had everything. We're also legally protected by Communist Party from whatever we were doing wrong. I remember by accident, I burned the wheat field, neighbor's wheat field, while we were playing with fire in the middle of the wheat field. Of course, the farmer was really upset. He tried to, I think, sue us, but there was enough. My father just sent the police there to his home, or secret police, and very quickly that lawsuit went away. The same with, I set the fire a motorcycle to one of our neighbors, and that was dealt with the same way. No responsibility. Everything was covered by Communist Party. So the life communists and people aligned with socialist Marxist ideology were not so bad in those times. But now, after my father left when I was 7 years old, and there was like a lot of friction in my family. Anyway, from the very beginning, my mother was Catholic. My entire family was Catholic. My father's family was Catholic. My father was communist. So I remember even when I was, I think, 3 years old, I still have vividly remember, 3 or 4 years old, I was very young. My mother tried to take me to church on Sunday. And, my father, I still remember him standing in the door with his arms outstretched and say, you may go, but I wish you didn't go. But he is not going, our children will not go to church. I can lose my job, I can lose my career because of it. So he's not going. Well, that was the time when my grandmother visited. So they passed me to the window. My mom passed me to grandmother to the window, and we went to church, but there was constant fights. And I think eventually my father had to make a decision, either choose the career or family. Well, he chose the career, so he left. And this is when I realized, when I learned what means to be hungry, not to having warm clothes in those cold Baltic winters. And I remember the food that we used to have. We can just go to to the Communist Party headquarters, dining facility, and we can eat whatever we wanted to eat. It was not there anymore. Now, my mom had to buy the food standing in line. And the thing is that the line was so long that sometimes there was not enough bread to buy for everybody. So if my mom did not get up early enough, so the line, and then when she came to the end of the line, there was no bread. Well, then we were going to kindergarten or school. I mean, the school already. That was my second grade. So we were going to school hungry. Initially, I remember I was surprised. Well, why we don't have food? But then I just got used to it. Me and my siblings, and we understood that. Well, sometimes you just have to be hungry. It was become like a second nature, being normal. Of course, my mom tried to get up every day and get bread, get something to bread, but she was not always successful. So this is one thing. Two, the political indoctrinations in schools. We were learning and say to prize and sing the communist song, prizing communism and socialism. Not so much maybe communism, because there was not so much stress about communism in Poland or in Eastern Bloc. It was stress on building socialism. We all were building socialism. That's the greatest ideology and economical system in the world. So I remember there was a lot of resistance from Poles. Poles never bought into benefits of socialism or Marxism. Matter of fact, they hated it, because it became so oppressed. Being second grade student in elementary school, I didn't see many of these. I learned about it later, but people were being hunted after Second World War. If you fought the war on the wrong side, not on the Soviet side, but on the Allied side, shoulder to shoulder with Brits, France, in the United States, most likely your life in Poland was miserable if you were allowed to leave, because many of these people coming back from the West, many veterans were just murdered by socialist government. And till today, in Poland, there are still mass graves of political opponents of socialism are being found. I think the last grave with, I think, 6 Poles opposing socialism were found a year ago. So this is decades after fall of socialism and communism, and there is more to come. So I'll give you another example. Polish ace from Battle of Britain and top scoring ace in Polish Air Force. When he came back from Great Britain after the Second World War, he was promptly arrested and sentenced to death. There was, I think, a personal intervention of Churchill that he was allowed to leave, and his death sentence was changed to life in prison, then 10 years in prison. And then after Stalin's death, he was released from prison. But he spent decade in communist prison and quite long time on death row. And this is nothing isolated. This is what happened to Poles who were independently thinking and did not support the depravity and perversion of socialism, Marxism, and communism. I'll give you another example. This is important. This is how the Poland became the synonym of resistance to socialism and communism, become the symbol of resistance to socialism and communism and the perversion of these ideologies. Another example would be Captain Rotmistrz, they would say, call it Captain here, Pilecki. This is a man who was fighting in 1939 Germans. Then he was fighting in underground in Polish Home Army, the largest underground army in the world at the time. And then he volunteered to be caught by Germans and sent to Auschwitz. He went there at his own will to write the reports, what really is going on. Those reports were later passed to the West. So West knew what Germans were doing, the West knew about the Holocaust, about the genocide that the Germans were committing in occupied countries. So he was eventually, he participated in the famous Warsaw Uprising. Eventually, he ended up Soviet-occupied Poland. Says occupied. It was initially militarily occupied, but then it was politically occupied for another 40 years. I would say since 1944 till 1990s, early 1990s. So when he was arrested after the war, he was executed in the prison. And there's many Poles who resisted socialism and communism, who disagree with the perversion, depravity of socialism, were murdered by socialist regime. Again, when I was when I was in second grade, I was 8 years old. I really didn't know much of it. My first running with the socialist secret police was when I was in the 5th grade. Well, actually, a little bit earlier, because my uncle was always opposing socialism. He was arrested many times. He has his own business, making bricks and cinder blocks. But because he was doing it too good, his product was too good, the Communist Party came to him and told him to scale down. He said he can't because he needs to support his family. So, and I learned that when I was, I think, like 3rd or 4th grade about it, because our family was very close. So my uncle, my mom, my aunt, they were all always together. And so this thing was well known in our family. And so when he didn't want to scale down his production, that was competing actually with the government's sites doing the same thing, producing the same product. The anti-fascists, they call themselves anti-fascists, terror groups were sent on his family. They sent on his production facility. First he was threatened, then they came destroy his production facility. They burned it. They attacked his family. They attacked him. When he went, it happened 3 times. Eventually, he ran out of resources to rebuild his business. So when he went to complain to police, they beat him some more, sent him back home and say he needs to get along with the socialist ideology and socialist economic system. Then he will be okay. So I learned that. And then in the 5th grade, this is the 5th grade in Poland at the time. At 5th grade in Poland at the time, the learning Russian language became required. It was required. It became compulsory. So I was not the best student, and having another subject thrown into my into my classroom, Russian language, I of course speak out, and I spoke up, and I asked teacher, why do we have to learn Russian language when we don't even speak Polish very well? Some people have a hard time reading even Polish books. And I didn't get an answer, but I got from my ear. There was in Poland this is the way they deal with unruly students. The teachers deal with unruly students. I was pulled out of my bench, marched to the principal's office. The teacher explained what I asked, and I was still surprised. At that time, it was nothing political. I was just being a little bit lazy, and I didn't want to go and do extra homework. So, but the principal called police. So my mom was a teacher in different school. Police on the way to my school, they went and detained my mother. They brought her with them. So there were 2 uniform officers and 3 secret police individuals, the secret terror police. And they started yelling at us in the principal office. They told my mother that if she doesn't instill more love for socialism and the family in us and kids will be taken away, put in government orphanage, orphanage and taught and the real the manners and be um, being isolated from the family and family influence, and basically taught the socialism by the government. So my mom was scared. I was scared too, but I didn't realize yet how omnipotent, how powerful the socialist state is. As everywhere, every socialist state eventually end up in this type of oppression. So that was my experience from eventually how I changed from having everything to having nothing, and then being exposed to the terror of socialist government. So, and from then on, actually my uncle stepped in. He taught me how to listen to Radio Free Europe. He taught me how to listen to BBC and the most important Voice of America. It was there was an entire network of antennas in Poland and also in every East European country, trying to drown the signals from BBC, Voice of America, and Radio Free Europe. So you have to make it very loud and sometimes change the frequency on your knob. You have to use the knob a little bit to turn it to make sure you can hear it. And the danger, and then I realized how dangerous it was, because you could be arrested. I, as a kid, was like, you will end up in orphanage, but it would also cause arrest of my mother and prosecution and persecution of my family. So I remember my mother, when she found out I'm listening to these radio stations, she was petrified. And I was required to have 10 blankets over my head and the radio and pillows. I mean, anything you can put so the neighbors could not hear, because the society at the time was so terrorized by the state that people did not, if they had, you didn't know who your neighbor was. And I don't know if you are aware about I think people are more aware how Stasi in East Germany operated. But it was the same thing in Poland. So you have to be very careful who do you speak, who knows what you do, because you could end up in prison or being persecuted. Sometimes it was enough to ask the question, why the lines for bread are so long and around, they wind around entire city block. And if wrong person overheard that question and snitch on you, you could end up trying in police station, trying to explain, what did you mean? The bread lines are so long. Also, I noticed too that while we were hungry, the Marxist propaganda of socialist state were beaming with accolades to the economy of socialist system, how we are the most powerful economically state in the world, how good people have. And as a contrast, they always put the United States, they always found some homeless people living under a bridge. And that was the main narrative. Well, unfortunately to communists, people didn't buy into it, because there's many people came back from the Second World War. They had the contacts with Western civilization. Some of them remember Poland from before the Second World War. So it was easy to not to fall for this Marxist narrative. But that was the life as a child in socialist state run by communists and Marxists like my father.
Yeah, that's quite the description. There's one person who we need to just talk a little bit about, and that's your mother. Man, there's a couple of heroes in your book, and I think your mother is certainly one of them. She is very interesting, and I'm not sure I would want to get on her bad side. She was not the one to be trifled with. And one of the best stories in your book, Drago, you mentioned that she was a teacher, and maybe you could just tell the story of what happened when you kicked another girl, and that eventually made it back to your mom, because like you say, it would appear that the level of punishment inside the schools are a little different than how they deal with it today. But what happened to you when your mom found out that you actually kicked another girl?
This is different now. Now with Poland is free, beautiful country, and does have the very similar system to what we have here in the United States, and also the educational system. But at that time, that was my first grade. We just classed up to the first grade. My father was still there, living with us in the house. And I remember, because in Poland at the time, the kids could not go to same school where parents were teaching if they were teachers. And because of my father communist connections, there was made exception, and I was accepted to the school next to my home where we lived, the apartment where we lived. So I could attend to the same. And I thought that I am the most powerful person in the world at the time. I didn't have to worry about anybody because my mother was a teacher there. And I remember when we class up, my first grade was class first B. And it was first A, first B, first C. So in first B, one of my friends just looked at the girl and said, "This is my girlfriend." I think she said that I am her boyfriend. And I remember, being the first grade, I was like the male chauvinist, I think, as somebody can be. I said, "I don't need any girlfriend." I went up there and kicked her. Again, I feel really, it haunts me to today. But at that time, I was very proud of myself. She cried. They walked her to a medical room. And I thought that this is it. She came back to class. She was sitting on the back bench, and she was quietly crying. So I was like kind of proud of myself until my mom showed up in the class. And I remember she just talked for a second to the teacher because she was not teaching the class. I was with my proctor that was in the class. So the entire class, she got quiet. My mom looked at the class. It's like, look at me and say, "Who did you hurt? Who did you hurt?" And the entire class just turned around and stretched their fingers like, "Me, that girl." So I remember my mom woke up, grabbed me by my ear, woke up in front of the entire class, dropped my pants and underwears. And I was being spanked so hard and so long and so loud until I started crying. Then I was allowed to put my underwears, my pants back on, and I was told to march to this girl and profusely apologize. I remember I was apologizing, I think, for 5 minutes. All the time crying until she started laughing. You say, "Okay, it's all is good." And I remember I never touched a girl again. That was the lesson, because that was not over. When I came back home, I was spanked again, but this time with the belt. So, and my father also stepped into it and did the same thing. So I got beat up 3 times, and that was enough for me. So I was become a very nice person, especially to girls in my class. Never had a problem. So that was typical. Like I remember in the class, especially in elementary class, if you didn't answer the nice way to the teacher, they'll just grab your hand. They have the straight line, like maybe like 18 inches long and like 3 inches wide. They grab your hand and beat you up there with in the hand, or pull your ears out. So I remember sitting in the class, in one of my students, one of the students in my class answered like very harshly to teacher something. I was even afraid to turn around to see. I was here, the slapping around, until he started crying. So that was pretty common. But children respect teachers, respect them or fear them. Either way, there was, and I never remember anybody making gestures or being disrespectful to teacher. until the teacher left. Then we can maybe let go. As long as teachers didn't say, we could actually talk about it, or we could rebel. But until the teacher show up, then everybody sitting straight, hands on the bench, sitting in the work benches and waiting quietly on the word from teacher. So yeah, that was the. But you know what? It was not so bad, because I remember when we learned biology, math, physics, geography, or electronics, we knew a lot of stuff by heart. We had to know it, because otherwise we could be spanked by teacher, or even worse than the student's notebook. If teacher wrote something not positive about you, that means trouble at home, problems at home. So I remember the education in Poland at the time was on a very high level, although it was skewed by the communist and socialist ideology. So everything that was historically truth but did not support socialist ideology and Marxism was thrown out of schools. So I remember even the history classes, they were so skewed that you would think that first Polish kings from 1,000 years ago were Marxists, communists, and socialists. This is the way it was presented to us, that how perverted was that. The entire history of Second World War was skewed and perverted. We didn't know many of the heroes who fought on the Allies' side, those heroes who resisted the German invasion in underground structures, those heroes who resisted Soviet Union in underground structures. Please remember that Poland was attacked from both sides. Poland, for political reasons, it was all hidden, not only to Poles, but also to the West. At least West was complicit in saying thing about it. But Poland was attacked by the Soviet Union, so was fighting on two fronts. Of course, 30 days later, Poland capitulated, was overrun by Germans from the West and the Soviet Union from the East. But I still think it was not so bad compared to France, where they, after 30 days, shed the pants, raised their white flag and ran away, leaving the guns in the ditches and throwing their uniforms in the ditches, being happy that, hey, no, the war is over. They were, at that time, there was already Poles that escaped to France. They were their own fight plane squadrons equipped with French equipment. They were fighting Germans on the French soil for Frenchies, who basically ran away, turned their bags on Poles, and then they tried to sell them out to Germans. So a lot of Poles escaped France to Great Britain when they reformed and built the most effective fighter squadron of Battle of Britain, the Squadron 303. There are legends about this squadron. So also the Polish submarines that escaped from Poland at the end of September, they also participate and fought shoulder to shoulder with allies. Of course, many of these people were killed, arrested after returning to Poland after Second World War, because Poland was sold out by the West, just like Ukraine is being sold out by the Europeans in Berlin, France, and London to Russia. So yeah, we can talk about later, but yeah, so that history of Poland is very tragic, but Poles were able to rebuild their country and free it from socialism and communism. Today, in Polish constitution says you can go. It is forbidden to promote totalitarian systems like communism and fascism and any totalitarian system. It is illegal, because Poles know how dangerous these ideologies are.
So, if we fast forward a little bit in your youth, you got more involved with sort of the anti-socialist, movement, which eventually resulted in you ending up as a political prisoner in a in a prison. Just prior to you coming over to the United States, just give us some perspective on the day in the life of a political prisoner. Again, for anybody who wants the details, read Drago's book, and you'll get to see. Again, it is certainly not a life that anybody would want or anything along those lines. But Drago, for those who haven't read the book, summarize that. What life as a political prisoner in a a socialist prison? What was that like?
Uh, so it started way earlier than 1980s, where the uprising, when people raised up against socialism. It started in 1978, I believe, when John Paul II Pope came to Poland. And his words still resonates with me and many Poles. His words, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Here on the side note here, Vice President J.D. Vance, when he was speaking to the baboons of European Union in the room, when he said, don't be afraid, when he was addressing the censorship and oppression of people in Europe, now, today, he was not speaking to these baboons in the room. He was speaking to people, to citizens of Europe. Don't be afraid of your governments. You need to speak up. You need to stand up. This is the same thing when John Paul II, in his speeches, was conveying to Poles in 1978, and it resulted eventually in 1980s in creation of first in entire Eastern Bloc organization, a trade union totally independent from the Soviet Union. And it was something unprecedented at the time. And it was first break in the wall of communism kicked out. Poles did it. I was involved in it because my mom got involved in it. At that time, I was already doing kickboxing, taekwondo. I started with karate, kyokushin. So when Solidarity raised up, the trade union, when it was created, my mom was involved in it. I got involved in it. Of course, at the same time, as the communists in Poland, communists like my father, agreed to register that organization as a legal trade union, they were already plotting to destroy it. They were already creating lists of people to arrest. And it culminated in martial law in December 1980, when they arrested, 1981, when they arrested, December 1980, when they arrested, there's a different estimates, from 6,000 to 60,000 people in one night. Wow. On the day of martial law, they had already lists prepared. At midnight, they cut all communications out. There was no telephones, there was no radio, no TV, nothing. Everything went blind. And then people started coming in to the headquarters, because I was already part of that Solidarity, and actually I was at the Solidarity headquarters where that was happening. We were coming that their parents, their older children were being arrested and hauled off somewhere, nobody knew where. And so they arrested thousands of people in one night. By the morning, everything was pretty much pacified. When Poles woke up in the morning, there were police and military patrols on the streets. There were tanks and armed vehicles roaming the streets, and the curfew was imposed. So everybody had to stay home. Everything was shut down. So that was the beginning of the martial law. So I couldn't stand it. Poles couldn't stand it. They started organizing themselves, building the underground organizations and cells, trying to, maybe not so much combat communists themselves and not the military, but combat communist propaganda and censorship. The censorship was imposed was so strict, almost as strict as it was here under Biden administration where Facebook and LinkedIn and other Marxist tools were being used to silence American patriots. The censorship, but there was still powerful censorship there in Poland. So me and a couple of my colleagues from Solidarity, we decided we will fill that void and we start producing our own newspapers and inform people what really is going on. At the same time, the communist government announced that people who were arrested, the thousands of people that were arrested that night at midnight, they were not really prisoners. They were just internees, as the word was used. They were not charged with anything. They were only potentially, the way the government explained it, the narrative was that they were potentially dangerous. They could be potentially dangerous to the socialist state. So for their benefits, for their own safety, they were just put in the vacation spots where people used to vacations, where we know there were prisons. Where some of those prisons I was actually sitting in myself eventually later. But anyway, so we tried to counter that narrative against that censorship. We printed newspapers, the first newspapers. Our newspapers was just a leaflet, had 2 pages. But we were tracked down because information is the most dangerous, information and freedom. Those are the most dangerous aspects to socialist state. And they will do anything to keep everything under censorship. Because please remember, who controls information, controls the nation, controls minds. So it was very important for them to squash this. So groups like mine, there were many of them. And we eventually got caught. So for the leaflet with 2 pages, I was sentenced to 3 years of prison time and lost my citizen rights for the time, for longer than that. Now, basically kidnapped into prison. That's how I would say. This is not Poland today, but there was the reality of Poland in 1980s, 70s, 60s, 50s, and 40s. So, so that was how I ended up in prison. But I remember during the martial law, while I was still on the street, while I was still not in prison yet, I remember all the symbols of Solidarity trade union were banned. You couldn't wear any lapel pants because we used to wear like a little Solidarity lapel pant. So people in my city started wearing American flag as a symbol of freedom and resistance to socialism and socialist terror. And also at the same time, the activist judges working hand in hand with Communist Party and socialist organizations were arresting people, sentencing them to prison time, sometimes maybe to death. Before the martial law, many of those activist judges were sentencing people to death for opposition to socialism and socialist ideology. Like I mentioned earlier at the beginning, that there's the mass graves of Poles murdered by socialist terror state are still being found. And there are still many that are still there, but people are looking for it. There are entire organizations looking for these Polish heroes murdered by socialist state. So I remember the event where, of course, we couldn't wear Solidarity lapel pants. We were wearing American flags. At that time, there were checkpoints in the city where I was living, like maybe every 2-3 streets. So the buses or the trolleys were being stopped. People disembarked and the documents were being checked. If you didn't have a right document, you end up in prison and for quite some time until they can verify who you were. but they usually didn't want to touch the American flag. They were afraid that they hated it. They really hated it, but they were afraid to touch it. Until the time that I was driving, I remember they stopped the bus and they see almost everybody on the bus was carrying American flag. So
Wow.
they started ripping it off and roughing us up. They tore my jacket. I was kind of sad because my jacket, I didn't have a warm clothes. It was very expensive to buy clothes. If you could buy it, there's not like you can go to store and buy yourself a clothes. You just have to wait and make sure that, and kind of like be lucky that they actually dumped something in the store and you got some jacket. So they tore my jacket and tore my sleeve off my jacket and then put us back on the bus and they start stomping American flags, those little lapel pins, into the ground. The secret police with police and on the checkpoint. So as the bus was moving, somebody opened the bus window, this little tiny sled, and said, "Hey, we're gonna buy more of these American flags. We get them again." Well, they stopped the bus, they make us to get out, and they grab. I don't think they grabbed the right guy. They didn't really care. They grabbed the first guy, and while beating him with the sticks, they were running him into the police car and throw him there. I don't know what happened to the guy. Most likely, they just beat him severely, and if he was alive, was likely he was no, maybe he went back home. But so we got put on the bus and driven away. Of course, we bought another American flags and we're wearing it as a symbol of freedom and resistance to oppression. In this case, it was a socialist, Marxist oppression. So that was how I got involved. And eventually we got caught, of course, printing newspapers. That was prioritized to catch people printing things beyond the censorship. They were very adamant about getting these organizations. Didn't care about crime so much. I mean, you could get away. I think it was easier to get off the hook killing somebody at the time than creating those organizations opposing socialism and communism. So, yeah, we were caught, and I was thrown in prison. I received 3 years of prison time, and eventually I was shipped to one of the harshest prisons in Poland, very notorious prison, Hrubieszów, city on the Russian border, on border of Soviet Union. I want to distinguish here things, Russia and Soviet Union, because we all scream here like how bad is Russia, how Russians have a bad, well, that Russians are communism, that communism and Soviet Union still exist. Well, no nation in the world suffered more from the communism and socialism than the Russians themselves. They are smarter than that. What is happening there right now, I think they are pretty happy with what they have because the socialism and communism does not exist there. They can speak up, they can speak at free without so much worry about person. Of course, there are limits. Russia is not America. It's not free America, American country. But Russians don't feel oppressed today. From the information that I have from the people from Russia that I spoke. So they are pretty happy the way it is. Their economy is right now booming. I think their GDP is close to 4, between 3.5 and 4. So as we speak here in July 2025, their economy under stress from the war, but they are doing fairly well, and they are pretty happy. Their government has made what is not being said, has around 85% people that support it. They are proactively supporting it. So there is a distinction. Poles were not murdered by Russians in general. There were Russians working with secret police, but there were also Ukrainians, Georgians, and others. There was Soviet Union. There was evil empire. That Soviet Union today is gone. But most of the Poles during the reign of socialism, socialist terror, were murdered by Poles. So this tells you how twisted and dangerous this ideology is. If you subscribe to it wholeheartedly, basically you have to abandon any morals and any humanity that you had. Because
Yeah, and just on that one point, Drago, because I wanted to ask you this earlier, is that your father, like he was born in Poland, correct? Like he
Yes.
was he
Yes.
was a Polish citizen who
Yes,
just happened to grow up with communist ideals, correct?
yes, he subscribed to communist ideology, and he grew up as a hardened communist. Matter of fact, let me go uh, uh, on the side note here, mention that his views were very dangerous. What I see today, I've seen it then. His idea was that socialism is such a great country, socialism is such a great ideology. The problem is that people do not understand it. They have to be educated. So the whole educational system was geared up into the indoctrinating people into socialism as a first step to later communist transformation. So he wholeheartedly subscribed to it. When I asked him, what if people, seems like people don't like it in Poland. It seems like it's not working. People are hungry, they don't have a food. He said, well, we have all the food. I mean, what food do you need? I'll go and get you. I said, well, you can get it, but our mom could not get it. There are thousands of my friends who can't get it. There are our neighbors who can't get it. So what's wrong with the socialism? He says, nothing wrong. We just need to, it is happening. The shortages are happening because Polish people are too rich. They have too much money and they buy too much. There was the narrative of the government at the time that Poland, the Polish economy is so powerful, so strong that people make so much money that they spend too much money on stupid things, but also they buy too much food. So that was the explanation. Also, when I ask him, but seems like those people don't buy it. What do you do with them? Well, if you cannot convince them, if they are prominent people, for example, artists, actors, authors, we just isolate them. We remove their books from their libraries because my father was in charge. I learned it later. I didn't connect these things when I was there. My father was working in the Ministry of Art Culture, and he was the director of Department for Books, Libraries, Movies, and the house of like assembly points for the artists. So he was part of that censorship. And he said, we can cancel them. We remove their books from the libraries. We forbid actors to perform on the stage. Their movies where they were performed, they will be either censored or cut or completely withdrawn. And there are many movies on the shelves. There were many movies on the shelves in Poland because people like my father didn't agree with the message of that movie. They were never published. They are still on the shelves. And after the socialism fell, those movies were made available to Poles. But when I asked, what if it doesn't work, if that person still doesn't like communism? Well, this is why we have a prisons. And that doesn't work. We need to physically eliminate these people because these people are preventing most of the people from embracing the fantastic, awesome, great socialism that is such a great savior for humanity. That's what he was explaining to me because eventually, after my father left when I was 7 years old, but we were so impoverished that my mom could not afford feeding me and two of my siblings. So they decided to send me to my father. Of course, he fought it, but eventually I ended up there. So when I was in my 8th grade of elementary school and 1st grade high school, I spent time with my father. This is where I learned about his thoughts, ideas on the socialist system. And eventually, again, when he said that we need to physically exterminate people who are opposing socialism just to save the humanity, I had enough. But anyway, I was always, I didn't fit that very well. His wife at the time, their son, we were always fighting. So eventually I was kicked out back to home, to my mom. But again, that was my father. He didn't change his views until his death. When I spoke to him last time, he still believed the same thing. So that's what it is.
And Drago, what like you eventually immigrated to the United States. I'm sure. I bet your dad had views on that. But it wasn't just that you immigrated to the United States. You became a U.S. Navy SEAL. When you first told your father that not only had you emigrated to the United States, but that you were actually joining the U.S. military and becoming a U.S. Navy SEAL, like what was his reaction when you told him that?
Well, after he didn't know because I had no contact with him. I didn't want the contact. The only time I went to visit him because I felt sorry for him. And I was told actually by my family to just go and see him. So I did. But no, he would, if he knew that, most likely I would end up again in prison. I don't think he would tolerate these things. I remember I have a picture in my book when I'm in my brother in the cowboy, we have a cowboy belt, we have the cowboy pistol, the cowboy hat on it. They were so proud of, we're so proud of it. Me and my brother, we always wanted to be cowboys. We're cowboys or Indians, but we're one of them. We were so fascinated by the culture. We read a lot of books about cowboys. So I was I think it was the 1st grade or second, that was, I think, the 2nd grade, where my mom, and it was very expensive. She rented from other family the cowboy suit. And that picture is in that book. Yes. I was
Drago?
a proud moment for us. And my father went he went ballistic on us. How dare, he was not living with us anymore, but he was so mad. How dare we dress up like these Americans, those oppressor of free people, those oppressors of entire world, those bourgeoisie, that's what they call it. And so yeah, but I was so proud of that suit. And it was very expensive for my mom, but she did it.
Because when you first landed on the shores of the U.S., Drago, because that's the other thing it's really an interesting part of your book is when you first land on the shores of the United States and start walking around. What was your first impression? You hear all of this stuff when you're growing up about about what the United States is like, and then all of a sudden including directly from your father, like you say, dressing up, as a cowboy, this and that. You guys are so proud. Nobody likes it, and then you go there. And what was your first impression when you actually arrived on the shores and started walking around, small town USA?
Well, people need to understand that in Poland, even under this total censorship, news blackouts, and oppression, people love America. For Poles, for majority of Poles, there was America. There was that symbol of freedom, the symbol, that beacon. And I remember while I was in Warsaw living with my father for the year and a half, when I was coming from high school on the bus, I had to change buses. Happened it was in front of the U.S. Embassy. I remember sometimes I could spend hours just looking at those glass displays on the fence of U.S. Embassy. And I remember every week there was something new. So how people live in America and and I was looking through the fence, I was seeing these big, powerful, beautiful cars. I was thinking, well, Poland cannot be like this. this is such awesome. So sometimes I passed 2, 3 buses so I could read everything twice what was displayed on the fence of U.S. Embassy. And so for me, the choice was not very difficult after I was released from prison to wanting to come to America. I just didn't ever, I never thought it would be possible. I never thought America would accept me. So, but you can dream. So if I did, and actually it became a reality eventually because it became dangerous, not only for me, but for all people opposing socialism, especially those who were already marked by socialist regime, by communists in Poland. The socialist regime, but it was run by communists, Marxists. So I understood it was dangerous. There were times that I was kidnapped from the street, driven around the town, outside the town, in the fields and woods, and dropped off maybe 10, 15 miles away from home. I didn't have a car. My mom didn't have a car. Seldom anybody in Poland had a car. Matter of fact, I didn't even have a friend who had a car or who knows somebody who had a car. Put it this way.
Wow.
So I had to walk back home. And daytime was not the problem because I couldn't catch the bus. But at night, when I was dropped off in the field, the communication didn't work. Sometimes I had to walk 5 to 10 miles back home and barely making home in the morning. So yeah, that was becoming dangerous, and I was afraid. My mom was afraid. So I went to finally. I said, like, well, I don't think it will happen. Why America would accept me? But I went. I asked, and I was told to bring documents, bring what happened to me stuff. So I did, and damn, I was given like very quick, I would say almost emergency promissory note that I was accepted. So now with this note, I could actually apply for passport because in Poland you could not have a passport. Even the communists that had Polish passports, after the travel overseas, they had to return them to police station. So with this document, I could apply for Polish passport. And I was given, I think in my book, there is a picture of it with the stamp of that passport, with the picture of that passport with the stamp that I can cross Polish border only one time. So basically, it was just, I can leave, but I cannot come back. So we knew about it. My mom knew about it. I didn't think I would ever come back. We allowed to come back to Poland. So yeah,
That's so you arrive on in the shores of the United States all by yourself, Drago. Again, your family didn't
I had
come.
the clothes. I had the clothes, and I had the 10 shillings. 10 German Pfennigs in my pocket because before I came to America, there was like an assembly point for Polish refugees, political refugees in Germany. I think it was Bad Zonen. So when I landed there, I had 20. I was given 20. I think 20 marks. I had the $20. So first thing I did, I went. I bought myself a tape recorder, a little tiny tape recorder. I was dreaming my entire life to have a little tiny portable tape recorder so I can listen to my music anytime. And I bought one cassette. So my idea was I would go record the music from it. And so after I spent all the money, I had only 10 Pfennigs. So when I landed in New York, I had 10 Pfennigs of German money and bag of old 1970s type of clothes. So yeah. So what did I expect? I don't know what to expect. I was a bit afraid too because I didn't know where I will live, what I will do. I understood that I had no skills. I don't know the language, but I was prepared on the words. So when I eventually ended up in Memphis, Tennessee, I was given. There were people already, Americans, that took care of me. They helped me find a place. They helped me find an apartment. My first part-time job, it was so I became a janitor at school, and that was fantastic. I remember my first apartment. Well, I didn't know what the project was. So I was living there, and there was like a red light district. But that was my own. I could afford from the part-time job to pay for it, buy me a food, pay for electricity. And check this out. And I had air conditioning. I couldn't believe that because I never knew even what it was. Matter of fact, so let me step back to Poland for a second. Because when I was watching movies, American movies, sometimes they show some American movies. And I've seen those big high-risers or buildings with the boxes in the windows. I thought always, why Poles are not that smart and make the boxes in the window so we can put food up there? Well, at that time in Poland, like my mom, like milk or meat or something that needs to be cold, we put outside on the ledge, outside the window. Of course, accident happened. We either lost that. If you lost the meat, if the meat fell out, most likely you don't find it. Somebody grabs it, they run with it, and good meal. So, but if there was milk, you could injure actually somebody. So enamorated already with America, say, we need to make such boxes here. If we can make them, and people can put food up there, it's much safer. We can make a lot of money. But mom said, well, first you don't make a lot of money because the government will not allow you to make a lot of money. But the idea is good. He didn't know what those boxes was either. So when I landed in America, I found out they were not boxes for food. They were just air conditioning. That was amazing. That was like the enlightenment. And so I remember, and on the top of it, the apartment that I got had a phone in it. So I could call my mom. And I remember when my American friends, they drove me to the apartment and they show me what it is. And I couldn't wait for them to leave so I can call my mom and say, Mom, I'm living in my own apartment. I have my own air conditioning, the climatization, they call it in Poland. I had my phone. There's a kitchen and I have 2 rooms. There was one bedroom apartment. But in Poland, because of the infrastructure, it was so tight that people didn't count. The room was room. So if you had one big, they call it big room and small room. So usually kids were living in the small room and parents were living in their bedroom was in the big room. That was it. So, and also another thing, it happens to us, to the socialist government, the power of the government, of socialist terror government. In the apartment that I was living in, it was deemed kind of big because we had there were 2 rooms and the kitchen, but the apartment had 3 rooms. So the government decided to place somebody else in our apartment. So 1 room, the government gave to like some random person. Actually, there was one of the Communist Party members. And my mom, I remember, she was really upset. She didn't know that person, but he was living using our kitchen, our bathroom, just like it was his, because government told him that this is his. And it was nothing unusual. If the government deemed that you have too much space in your house, they were just giving you somebody else, you call it sublocator, to live in your place. And it was at the time when a family of 2 parents and 5 kids were living in the studio. So, and then on the top of it, when children grew up and they got married, very often they had to move into that studio with their wives and having kids on their own eventually behind the partition. So that was really not, that's welcome to socialism. What the people don't understand it here, and I hope they never will, because we don't want them. They never experience this type of life. And I don't think America, with that tradition of personal freedom, built on goodness, will allow something like this to happen. But socialism is dangerous. So anyway, so when I came to America, I couldn't wait for my American friends to leave so I can call my mom and brag about it. My job was part-time as a janitor at school. So every afternoon I was going there and cleaning school, toilets, classrooms, whatever it was. And I was proud of it. I was making money. I was being able to afford myself. Although, after I paid for my apartment, I think I still remember, it was $180 at the time, and pay for my apartment, my electricity. I have maybe like $20 left for food a week. Oh no, that was great. I mean, I could buy food for that. I could buy my own food, and but you know what? Like I had every week some American who often don't know me from Adam. They were just coming and say, hey, I just want to check. You mind if I look in your fridge, see what you need? I have some milk for you. I have some cereal for you. I know you like cereal because it became a legend eventually. My first grocery shopping I made with my American friends. So they were bringing me food. They were bringing me clothes too, because the clothes that I brought home from Poland, they were like 1970s style. I wouldn't fit well in it, and so they were checking that I have food. They were checking that I have my clothes. They were bringing me clothes if I needed. They brought me furniture. So, for me, that was so unreal. And this is the biggest contrast that I see between the Poland I escaped from and the America, the free country built on goodness and personal freedom. I remember these moments I will never forget.
And Drago, again, if we fast forward a little bit, because I don't want to end without talking about your experience as a SEAL, is that, it's funny just watching you talk about this. Again, as you recall it, again, it clearly makes you, it's really good memories. And where that eventually led to is a really good lifestyle. And then all of a sudden, when you're in your early 30s, 31 years old, you decide to switch everything up, not just join the U.S. military, not just join the U.S. Navy, but to actually try and go forward and become a U.S. Navy SEAL at the age of 31, which I'm guessing is pretty much unheard of. I'm not sure how many other SEALs would start the process at 31, but just maybe give us some insight into that decision, because again, it's clear in the book too. That's it's not just like a change you made because, you wanted to move up the ladder. And this was an ideological change that you had made at that point.
I was already up the ladder. I had an awesome life. I was working as a Mercedes mechanic. I had everything I wanted to do. I was skydiving. I could afford almost anything I wanted to have. I was skydiving. I was teaching actually skydiving. I was AFF Jump Masters at the time. I could afford it. I loved it. I had everything. I had an awesome life. I was living American dream. And but then, the first war broke out, the first Persian War. And at the same time, when the war broke out, I became U.S. citizen. I was given, I think, the most precious gift America can give to somebody, the citizenship. I could do everything any American could do. I became American, and it dawned on me the great life that I have. Everything I have, everything I own, I owe to American people, to America. So when the war broke out, I said, well, it is my moral obligation to just hang it up for a while, my life, go join military and fight in the war or wherever America needs me. And then I will come back to my life and resume my awesome American dream. Well, so I went to join military. I didn't know even how to do it first. I had to be actually instructed. The people, my skydiving friends helped me to get to the recruiting office. I explained what happened. And I didn't know much about Navy SEALs. I met them while skydiving in the Western Tennessee Skydiving Center. And they were great guys. And they find out that I already applied to Army for enlistment to fight war on behalf of America. They talked me out of it. They told me to change the papers and go to the Navy. And maybe I can become even Navy SEAL. So when I asked recruiters in the Navy what it is, they show me like this recruiting video. I say, oh yeah, I would like to do that. if I can. But they told me I need to go to Army guys, get my documents, because my documents were almost completed. And it was kind of awkward to me because I made friends with them in the Army office. But anyway, I went up there and they didn't like it, but they gave me the documents, and I took them to the Navy. And like my being Navy SEAL, that was not what drove me into military. Uh, but eventually, I did become Navy SEAL. I graduated from boot camp as a #1 recruit, the best recruit. I graduated from the A school as a parachute rigger, the Navy trade school, in the top of my class. And when I applied for the SEAL program, I guess Navy saw something in me, and they said, well, we give you the waiver, being 32 years old, to go to SEAL training. In 1992, I'm sorry, I received orders, the waiver for my age, the orders to go to SEAL training. I jumped in the car and I drove it. I was married by this time because right before enlistment, there was very short notice. My paperwork was done. The trade that I picked up in the Navy was the parachute rigger, PR school. That was in Milton at the time. And I was told that to go to that school, I would have to leave to boot camp next week. And so I had to be sworn into the delay enlistment program on Friday and Saturday, I think on Saturday, I left. It was Thursday when I was enlisted. So I called my girlfriend and I said, hey, I'm joining the Navy, so we need to get married. She's like, what? You must be kidding me. Yeah, but so we found the judge. We got married. Next day I went, got sworn in the delay entry program. And that weekend I left for boot camp. So that was quick. And so I was given that honor to join to be allowed to go to SEAL selection, commonly known as a BATS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training. That I graduated with class 185. Eventually was assigned to SEAL Team 2, SEAL Team 4. And at the end of my career as a SEAL instructor in basic underwater demolition SEAL center.
What would be harder, Drago, Hell Week or your time in the in as a political prisoner? Is there one that was obviously Hell Week? For those of us who can kind of read about it from the outside in, certainly doesn't look like it's obviously a brutal time. But I can imagine your time as a political prisoner would also be a brutal time. Which one of those is more difficult?
Both were very difficult. Although when I was in BATS, I was never threatened with being killed. The death there was that was not something that you understood that training is dangerous, and there were people that died in training, but I was not afraid of that. In communism prison state, there was pretty much like the death centers, delayed death centers, because eventually if you continue in the same line, you end up either in prison again or just disappear from society, basically being killed, like many others before me. So that part was easier physically. And I didn't understand at that time, but I understood when I became SEAL instructor in BATS myself. There is no amount of preparations that you can do to make it easy. There's nothing you can do to make it easy. It is designed to weed people with not as strong as they need to be, people physically weaker. And I just wanted to make a certain comment here, because I hear very often from people that you don't have to be strong, you don't have to be physically fit, you just have to be mentally strong. If you're mentally strong, you're gonna make it. Well, let me tell you this, if your legs fell out from under you, no matter how physically strong you are, if no legs don't work, you don't make it, you won't make it. Same with swim, same with anything. Although I know, like myself, I was not physically prepared. And many people, they went at the time, they were not physically prepared. They did not have what we have today, special preparatory program before you go to BATS. It's much better today. It is more scientific way, more scientific approach. But at that time, you just show up and show what you can do. And so, yeah, that was. But like with my state of mind at the time was, I'm not going there to try to be Navy SEALs. I was given that honor, that opportunity to go for that selection. So I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to quit. That never crossed my mind. And I just went there to become Navy SEAL until my health or my performance would eliminate me from it. But otherwise, I went there to be a Navy SEAL, became Navy SEAL.
So last question for you, Drago. I've been dying to ask you this question since I read your book. You obviously go on to an extensive career in Iraq and to complete numerous deployments. You were a breacher, but one of the things you talk about in your book is the Drago English classes. Now, obviously, English is not your first language. However, it would seem that when there was a terrorist or something like that who was captured by your team and they claimed that they didn't speak English, you apparently could go in and teach them English very quickly. And it ultimately became known as the Drago English classes. Now, in your book, you actually don't go into detail in terms of how you were effectively able to teach them English so quickly. Could you extrapolate again after reading your book? This is the one thing that I was keen on is why were the Drago English classes so effective?
Well, they were effective because they had to be effective. We need to get that information from parents as quick as possible so we can expand our search for other terrorists. And I was effective, I guess, because of my personality. I will not go into details here because maybe one day I can patent the system. So I don't want to give it away so easily. But I can tell you that because of my personality, I guess being super nice, personal, I was able to compel them to learn English very quickly. Although I can add that we always, every class, we start with words, I love America. And I remember that's like eventually after a short course, after a few minutes, they were very passionate about America. They were very clearly with big passion for saying how much they love America. So that was just the introduction. And then Drago technique followed. And usually they end up speaking with English very well, sometimes even with better accent than I can speak today. So I remember me and a friend of mine. I know I have permission to say his name, Tage Gill. We were sometimes musing how this guy can speak better English than I can after a short class. And I tell you, sometimes even I was jealous.
That is a great way to finish. Again, I would, for those that are listening, we've barely scratched the surface on the book and Drago's past and all of his experience. I would highly recommend people take a read of your book, Drago. Again, if nothing else, you will gain an appreciation for life in North America like you've never had before. So again, I would. It's not a book about a Navy SEAL. It's a book about the contrast between Poland and the United States, and Drago has lived the highs and the lows of both of those. And Drago, again, thank you very much for joining us today. We very much appreciate the time, and maybe we'll get together at some point in the future and do part two, because again, like I said, we barely scratched the surface, but thank you very much for joining us today.
And could you put this book onto the screen so people can see?
Absolutely.
Yes. So the pledge to America. And again, I would like to emphasize, this is not a book about Navy SEALs. This is just the lens so my fellow Americans can appreciate the country that we have. This book is a lens to show the contrast between the freedoms that we have, between the awesome lives that we have in America. Even if we have to struggle sometimes, but this is when they look through that prism of socialism and communism, the perversion, the depravity of socialism, people can appreciate maybe more what we have here in America, the greatest country in the world.
I totally agree with that. That contrast, Drago, as it absolutely comes out in the book. And again, that when the chapter in the book, when you talk about when you first hit the shores of the United States, even just hearing you talk about, again, the box that sits outside the window, right? Like it's, and all the things that, frankly, we take for granted here. They can be taken away in a heartbeat. You know what I mean? And that's exactly kind of the life that you grew up in. So, and again, for most of us, we can't even fathom it. We can't even comprehend that lifestyle. But again, if we're not careful, it can certainly change. It can certainly change. So, yeah. But Drago, thank you very much. And yeah, I hope we get a chance to chat again. But thanks again for your time.
Sure. Thank you for my freedom. Thank you.